Hello there. Um, I tell you what, sometimes you do get triggered by Jehovah's Witnesses, and after my meeting with one, two, three, four of them on Saturday, something that burned in my mind, which I'd never really thought about before, is they were because of death in the family and illness and potential death in the family reference paradise because the hope of paradise. And when my stepfather was dying, I remember my mother whispering into my stepfather, "You will wake up in a paradise." It's odd, isn't it? Because for most religions, not every religion, obviously, Christian religions, they believe that transference to the heavenly paradise is immediate. Hence why today I read people who are Facebook friends. I was saying, "Happy heavenly birthday, sis. Hoping you're having a great party up there because it's a birthday." Yeah, I understand why people do this. It brings them comfort, but it's for them when somebody dies and that the last moments is in pain or suffering, whatever. And if they think that they've instantly been transferred to go up to the heavens and they're looking down on them, they'll send a wee message with a wee feather. All so you look out the window and there's a squirrel. Hello, that's it gives them comfort because we all want to be comforted when we lose somebody we really love and somebody we're close to. For people who believe in the heavenly choice instead of the paradise earth, they get that comfort straight away. But for Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't. Because, in case of all of them so far, they've probably burned their loved one, nothing left of them, given the ashes and scattered them in the sea or wherever it is, or the favorite kingdom hall, I don't really know. And that's it. And they've got to rely on now, in the memory of Jehovah. This is the same guy who forgot he just flooded the planet and destroyed billions of creatures on it. The ark. Suddenly Jehovah remembered the ark. Noah. Look it up. I wouldn't really rely on him to be able to bring back all the loved ones that of yours, brings them back in their personality. It's because Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in this thing of the everlasting soul. Once you're dead, you are dead, and there isn't this separate part of you containing the essence of you, which transfers up to a spirit creature in the heavens. Although that teaching is in the Bible. So I was thinking to myself, why did I believe that? How many times does the teaching of a paradise on earth actually occur in the Bible? Somebody said three times. I just thought, in commenting on the last video, didn't I? Just thought, and you've been brief, and I thought three, and they're right. It's three times. But paradise, the word paradise, as we know it, is mentioned in the Bible, all in the Greek scriptures. It's really, really odd. I've never thought about it before. So why did I believe in paradise? Because when I came into the truth, my study book was From Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained, the book with the chilling pictures inside of an earthquake of a girl falling into a gap in the earth, plunging to her death, holding onto a doll, and also a cat and a dog falling in as well. Literally, this isn't a merciful God. He'll just destroy you unless you are a baptized Jehovah's Witness. It's the same teaching today. So I believe that. And then, that Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. And then the book came out in the 80s, which is the one that we used to do when I used to do pioneering and study with people. And that one was called, I'm going to have to check it, it's got it, You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth, Paradise Again. And all the pictures of, everybody's wearing clothes. Don't know where they get the clothes from. And everybody's smiling and having a happy time and living in wood cabins next to locks. And badgers are coming on, and stroking badgers, that sort of thing. And you're thinking, where, you just accept that is the hope without thinking of where that came from. And it just isn't there. It just is not there in the Bible. In fact, let's see. what I didn't have back then, which is what you have now, you're able to go into Google and go into Google AI mode or all mode or whatever it is, and it will then reference so many different publications and then give you your bullet point answer, which really helps. You don't have to spend hours and hours in researching them. And literally, I'll cobble this together in 10 minutes and we'll try to navigate these screens just in front of me. But anyway, AI overview, the specific English word paradise appears 3 times in the New Testament. Of standard English Bibles, in the original Hebrew and Greek source text, the underlying word paradisio appears 3 times in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible and 3 times in the New. So 3 times in the Old, 3 times in the New. That's a whopping 6 times. In the New Testament, you do get mentions. Jesus tells a criminal on the cross, not the cross, the cross. Truly, I say to you today, where he put in the comma, you will be with me in paradise. If Jesus meant that day, it come because Jesus died. And are we to assume at this point that Jesus said, I'll be with you in paradise, but Jesus was to go to heaven. He wasn't then to come physically to the earth because he'd be getting rid of his body. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense, Jesus. You're not making a lot of sense here. 2 Corinthians 12:4, Paul speaks of a man caught up into paradise, linked to the third heaven, caught up into paradise. So that's again associated with heaven. And Revelation 2:7, a promise regarding the paradise of God and tree of life. So yeah, whoever wrote Revelation, claims on mushrooms that day, magic mushrooms, and he drunk probably far too many desperados. So then you get 3 others in mentions in the Testament, all referring to actually gardens, not a future hope for everybody. So how many times, that's 3 in the Greek, 3 in the Hebrew, how many times do you get the word heaven used in the Bible? And here's the kicker. The word heaven appears roughly 600 to 700 times in the Bible, depending on specific translation. New Testament about 276 times. Appears in over 50 of the 66 books of the Bible. That's most of the Greek Hebrew ones. Highest concentration is the Gospel of Matthew, meaning different things. Here's the thing. Why isn't the word paradise throughout the Holy Scriptures used 700 times, and the heavenly hope, which has been attributed to a small number of people, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, only 6 times? Why is it the wrong way around? Why, for the billions of people who lived, and it is, according to when you do it again, we're now able to tell, which is interesting, of how many people were living at the time that Jesus was alive, approximately 300 million. How many people have been living from the time of Adam to Jesus? It's a low few billion. But and how many Israelites were at the time? Quite a few million, I think, vacated Egypt and went into the promised land. Never quite got there and spent 40 years getting killed by God one by one, or snakes or whatever. The end of the day is, the hope until Jesus arrived on this earth was for the paradise. So it should have been repeated from, the first book of the Hebrew Scriptures to the last book, time and time and time again, maybe 1,000 times. Paradise, paradise, looking forward to paradise, restoration of paradise, our hope, paradise. We will fall asleep and awake in paradise. Paradise, paradise, paradise. And therefore, anybody basing their religion on the Hebrew Scriptures, that would be their main core belief. Or anybody listening to these people, that'd be their main core belief. But it isn't. Because paradise, is not there. How, it's bizarre. Lord of the Rings, when the Fellowship leave Rivendell and Frodo, they all know they've got a quest. They all know what the game is. They don't all of a sudden go, right, we've got to take this ring, but nobody knows, is it where we're going with this ring? No. Oh, I thought we knew where we're going with this ring. What they do? They know they're going to Mordor. They know they're going to Mordor, but some of them may not make it. But the end of the day is they knew what the purpose in their life and potentially their death was. The end game was to get to Mordor. to return Middle Earth to paradise. But here in the Bible, which is not fiction, well, let's believe it's fact, there's just nothing referencing paradise at all. It just isn't in there. Otherwise, the Jewish belief system would be full right now of people based on the Hebrew scriptures or different versions of that. All they would believe is the paradise. In fact, it gets even more confusing when you think about Saul, Saul, the king of Jehovah's people. Remember, the Philistines were attacking, and all of a sudden, his old chum David wants to become king, and he's thrown out all the people who do speak, all the spirit witches who do speak to the dead souls, which clearly don't exist. And if this was the teaching that when you die, you're dead, and you just are in Sheol asleep until you're awakened, transformed back into a earthly body, back to a paradise on earth. Saul would not be then trying to hunt out the witch of Endor to say, yeah, I know I persecuted you lot, but any chance you could get in contact with the old prophet Samuel for us, I need to have a word. And she's going, oh, I thought you were persecuting us. Yeah, well, I'll let you off on this one. But can you just have a quick word with Samuel? And Samuel then came back speaking to her and says, oh, yeah, I'm afraid, you're probably not going to last the night. And of course, the prophecy came true. So why would Saul do that? And why is that in the Bible? To confuse everybody when it relates to Samuel dying and his spirit living on, and the king of Jehovah's people believing that. Why is that there? Why isn't that? Well, we knew Saul couldn't do that because, of course, by that time, because everybody believed in the paradise, and when you're dead, you're in Sheol or Hades, whatever it is, and so you sleep. So the Jews, I've never thought to myself, what do they believe when you die? Interestingly, again, if you go into this, it says ancient Israelites originally had little focus on elaborate afterlife, viewing life on earth as a primary arena for divine justice and human purposes. So, in other words, they just thought, this is it, this is what we've got. We'll go to Sheol, and that's it. Once you're in there, you're in there. So make the most of it and try and get as rich as you can. And then it goes on to how the nature of Sheol sort of changed through the ages. And then it says, this is really interesting. It says later Persian and Greek influence during the late biblical and Second Temple periods, around the centuries leading up to the Common Era, exposure to foreign empires and internal theological developments shifted views. Later writings, such as the Book of Daniel, began to introduce ideas of a future bodily resurrection, when the dead would wait to distinct fates of everlasting life or shame. By the time of the New Testament, distinct groups like the Pharisees, who believed in resurrection, and Sadducees, who did not, held contrasting views. Again, this resurrection, but not to this paradise. And it only came in the latter stages of the existence of the Israelites prior to Jesus arriving on the scene to then introduce this heavenly hope. The paradise is just not there. The hope is just not there. In fact, let's just think about it now. Then all of a sudden, Jesus comes and introduces this sort of heavenly hope to people. They have an access to go upstairs. But apparently, according to the witnesses, of course, it is only 444,000. Now, their numbers were buggered by the 2nd century. By that time, using this again, there's at least 200,000 Christians, many thousands of them believe in their heavenly hope that much that they even got torn apart. They were that convinced in their heavenly hope that they were persecuted, put on crosses, put in arenas, torn to bits. But they believed in this. They believed in the Christ, and they believed the power of the resurrection to heaven. They were willing to put their lives on the line and die for that belief in the heavenly resurrection. And 200,000 by the second, that was way before the Romans grew more, because the Romans, changed their religion to the Christian religion. So by the time when you get Charles Taze Russell and chums at the end of the end of the 19th century, that figure had all been achieved. In fact, when you think about the early Jehovah's Witnesses, God looked at the Jehovah's Witnesses and goes, right, lads, you're the guys for me. They still do not see they were called Bible students, study the Bible. They still never saw this paradise hope. So then it was all about going upstairs. It was that not there. They didn't even see it. It was that ambiguous. It wasn't that ambiguous. It just wasn't there. It wasn't there, the paradise. Instead, they believed that they'd ascend to the heaven, and when it was disappointment on disappointment, when they aren't going upstairs, and it was, and all of a sudden, the next thing you've got Rutherford comes onto the scene. I think it's about 1925. It eventually goes on to the millions now living will never die. Guess what? They've all died, so it's another false prophet. But I think only by the early 30s, about 35, all of a sudden this secondary class gets introduced. Why is that? Because it became obvious that the Jehovah's Witnesses at that time, that they'd reached 144,000, and then we're thinking, oh dear, we've got to take into consideration that there might have been one or two from Jesus Christ at this point who might have been of the 144,000, where they can't be going upstairs. Where can they go? And then all of a sudden, after like 40 years of this organization, they went to their book that they were Bible students of, and all of a sudden could piece together this thing that nobody'd ever seen before, paradise. And all of a sudden that got introduced to them as the alternative. Good news, guys, you lot aren't going to go to heaven. If you don't feel as though you're going to heaven, you know why you're not. Because you're not. Instead, your hope is that you're going to go to live in a paradise on the earth. And we're trying to, literally pull out of a hat a few scriptures, right? The lamb sits next to the lion, and the little girl plays in front of the spider's hole, and all, and all that lot. And we'll try and weave that in, even though it's just probably, whatever that is, a parable or referring to peace or whatever it is. All of a sudden, that's where they're getting the belief of a paradise. They never had it for 40 years, couldn't see it. Nobody during the whole time of the Israelites up to Jesus could see the paradise. He comes to the earth and talks about this earthly paradise. The early apostles, the earthly paradise. But all of a sudden, when the 144,000 had expanded in number, they had to create, to solve the problem of too many witnesses spoiling the heavenly broth, they had to create then a paradise on earth. And it's not in the Bible. And then we swallowed that hook, line, and sinker because we didn't have the ability to go back and check the numbers and going, hold on a second, this doesn't make any sense. It's not in the Bible. If God, Jehovah God, being the loving God that he is, fully intended for us, for the majority and billions of people who lived from Adam to Jesus, and from Jesus up until 1914, and the 7 billion people that are living today, if he wanted to save everybody, and that was always the hope, not to go to Mordor. It was always the hope to go back to the garden, as Crosby, Stills and Nash said. It was always a hope they'd go back to the garden, and if it was always a hope for that paradise earth to be restored on this planet, you would have thought that Jehovah God, the God of love, would have absolutely built that in to the Bible, every chapter. Certainly every book, time and time again. And it's there 6 times, but 700 times about heaven. It isn't a teaching the Bible. And yet it is what Jehovah's Witnesses now rely upon as a source of comfort for them when they lose loved ones, or when they're getting infirm or old, or they're dying. They think, well, it doesn't matter. I shall close my eyes and I'll open my eyes, and I will be on a paradise on earth, for a teaching that's not in the Bible. It's staggering. And it's so upsetting that I believed that for 28 years and just I took it as gospel when it's not even in the gospel. It's not there. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I suggest, why don't you just do your own research? Just question the fact is, why isn't the teaching of the paradise repeatedly in the Bible? Why did the Jews Why did they not believe that today? Why did Saul believe what he said? Why did the Sadducees and Pharisees disagree about this? Why, by the time when Jesus resurrected Lazarus, and I think he was speaking to Lazarus' sister, his wife, and saying, you'll see him again, and she goes, oh yes, I know, we'll see him in the resurrection the last day. Why wasn't that something that they've always believed in? Why did some believe that and not? Why isn't it in the Bible? And why didn't she say paradise? I know I'll see him in the paradise, because it's not a teaching in the Bible. It's well going beyond the things that are written. So when you see all those publications that show the wonderful paradise and the loch and the cabin and eating fruit, because nobody's eating animals, spiders are eating flies. There's a limit to where animals or insects are going to eat each other, but we don't eat animals. And there's harmony in the world. You have to think, where's that coming from? And it's not coming from the Bible. So if you know any Jehovah's Witnesses, why don't you ask them to explain to them how many times paradise in the Bible, show them in the Bible, and show them how it references that's what resurrected people are going to be living in. That's the future after Armageddon. It's just not in there. So if you do approach any Jehovah's Witnesses in the streets, you'd be disappeared there. If you do approach Jehovah's Witnesses in the street, in fact, next time I see the Carters, I may, because that should be an easy for them. It's a core, fundamental teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'd love them to get their Bible out and show me where this teaching comes from, because I know it's not there, and they're just clutching from straws. And they today are, as we discussed the other day, giving up the possibility of trying to make the most of the life that they have today, and giving up potentially being able to be a good musician or an artist or an athlete or a novelist or just whatever it is, or just traveling and seeing this world, because they think, no, we've got to survive Armageddon, because that's the only way that we'll survive Armageddon, be in the paradise, and we'll welcome back our loved ones who we want to see again, because we completely discounted the fact that the Bible references 700 times going to heaven, and we know that's been reduced to 144,000. There you go. Anyway, it's a bit long-winded, but I needed to get that one off my chest, because it has been bugging me since that. And this, again, I can only say is one of the reasons why I don't particularly like, although it may seem like I do this, like doing this sort of thing. It disturbs me about people I still truly love, how they're still wrapped in that. And I just want to shake them and just say, look, think for yourself. Think about this. This doesn't make any sense. And now Jehovah's Witnesses have the ability, like I've done, which I never had that ability, was to go and just do your own research and come to your own conclusion. And please, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, do that. Do that today. Do that this week. Don't waste any more of your time in an organization who continually has given false promises and built you up for a belief structure in something which just isn't in the Bible. Anyway, I'm off now. And I don't know when I'll see you again, but I'll leave this for those who want to ever come back to it. Thanks for your time. Goodbye.